A mysterious ship was found in the depths of the Pacific Ocean, so the U.S. Navy calls a team of scientists to investigate. A helicopter takes them to a ship in the middle of the ocean, and Navy Captain Barnes reports that they found a spaceship. In fact, psychologist Norman was called to the team because he wrote an article about unidentified life forms, which the Navy has used as a guide. The ship is buried under 8 meters of coral, meaning it has been there for 300 years and fell to Earth in 1709. They believe there may be life inside the ship, so they called the scientists to try to establish contact, discover where the aliens came from, and prevent a possible invasion. Barnes mentions that the Navy's sonar detected a low-frequency hum, meaning something is working inside the ship. As the team prepares to descend, Norman admits to mathematician Harry that his report was a hoax, and Harry agrees to keep it a secret. The scientists enter a submarine that takes them to a structure called the Habitat, which the Navy built as a base for the investigation. When they reach a sufficient depth, the team sees the spaceship and is impressed by its gigantic size. A team of Navy divers prepares a robot to open the ship's doors. Then the scientists walk from the Habitat to the spaceship. However, upon reaching the airlock, they cannot open it. Astrophysicist Ted uses a hammer and chisel to try to force it open, but the trick doesn't work, although it leaves a crack in the door. This seems strange to Harry, as the ship was not damaged in the fall, but simple tools could damage it. At that moment, marine biologist Beth notices that the door is emanating. Then Barnes orders everyone to back away, only to see the door open by itself. They enter, and Beth realizes there are footprints on the floor, meaning someone had already been there. The team splits up to cover more ground, and privately, Norman tells Beth about his false report, admitting that he got ideas from science fiction writers. The pair steps onto a platform that moves on its own and takes them to the next floor, where Beth screams upon seeing a human body sitting in a chair that died from blunt force trauma. In addition, it was holding a snack called smoked almonds. They conclude that they must be on an American ship. Then Beth checks the computer and is surprised to find the records in English. The flight records have dates with the year 43 and an item called Unknown Entry Event. Upon selecting it, a hologram appears around them showing a ship entering a black hole. Then the couple tells the others what they found, and Barnes takes them to the cargo hold, where they find a huge sphere. As it could be a trap, Barnes decides to install a security camera there. Norman realizes that everyone is looking at the sphere, but no one is reflected on its reflective surface. The group returns to the Habitat and discusses theories. Ted believes that the ship did not fall, but was absorbed by the black hole and traveled through time. At that moment, they are informed that there is a storm on the surface, so they need to return soon. Later, in their rooms, Harry tells Norman that he predicts they will all die, explaining that the ship entering the black hole was listed as unknown in the records because they couldn't make the report. Before sleeping, Harry comments that he would like to enter the sphere. Moments later, an alarm sounds, and Barnes checks the cameras, seeing Harry approaching the sphere. His reflection suddenly becomes visible, and just like that, Harry disappears. Barnes announces that they will not return to the surface until they find Harry. Then Norman puts on a diving suit and returns to the ship. He looks at the sphere, and Harry appears on the floor. Suddenly, his vital signs are normal, but he doesn't wake up. When Norman looks up again, his reflection appears in the sphere just before the power cuts out, and Barnes can no longer see them. In a few seconds, the power returns, and Barnes realizes that they are running on internal power, meaning the submarine is gone, and they will be staying there for a while. While Norman takes unconscious Harry back to the Habitat, maintenance worker Fletcher goes out to reset the timer on the mini-submarine. Barnes explains that they must do it every 12 hours to notify the Navy that they are still alive. If they forget, the mini-submarine will automatically return to the surface. On the way back, Fletcher notices a lot of live jellyfish swimming nearby. At first it looks nice, but soon the jellyfish get closer and start sticking to her suit. Suddenly, she feels the jellyfish inside her body and tries to get away, but they chase her. The damage caused to the suit causes water to enter, and Fletcher unfortunately drowns. The team brings the body back, and Norman shares that he was attacked by jellyfish when he was young and has been afraid of them ever since. Beth examines it closely and discovers that she had never seen that type of jellyfish before. Later, Barnes talks to Norman privately to reprimand him for not telling him about Beth's mental health history, as he just discovered that she once tried to take her own life. Barnes believes she could put the mission at risk and starts an argument, only to be interrupted by Teddy, who announces that Harry has woken up. The team gathers in the kitchen and watches as Harry eats very enthusiastically, commenting on the incredible taste of simple food. He also confirms that he entered the sphere, but doesn't say how he did it, which is strange since the sphere has no opening. Harry takes another bite, but when he discovers it's calamari, he starts to panic. Teddy tries to perform the Heimlich maneuver, but Harry clarifies that he's not choking, he just hates calamari. Moments later, Barnes calls Teddy to the computer because he has noticed some problems. While they try to solve it, Harry joins them and points to the numbers on the screen, telling Teddy to check if it's binary code and decipher it using a circular keyboard to match the sphere. Teddy does so, and the group is surprised to see that the numbers are messages sent by someone named Jerry. This mysterious Jerry says simple things like, "Hello," and "I'm happy," but Norman worries about what could happen if this entity got angry. Later, Norman hears a strange sound outside the ship, so he contacts another maintenance worker to ask about it, but receives no response. Norman informs Barnes, who upon checking discovers that the worker is outside the habitat. Norman and Beth go to look for her, only to discover that she is dead, and the noise was her hitting the wall. Beth examines it closely and is surprised to notice that the body has been pulverized. Beth takes the body back to the station. Eggs begin to fall to the floor. Suddenly, Barnes notices something on the sonar and tells the couple to hurry because the unknown entity is approaching. As soon as they enter, the entity disappears from the sonar. Later, Barnes and Norman go to the computer and discuss a plan of action to communicate with Jerry. But at that moment, a message appears asking what a plan of action is. This means that Jerry is listening to everything they say. When Jerry stops sending messages, the entity reappears on the sonar, and the eggs begin to fall again outside the habitat. Beth points out that they must protect the sensor grid, so Barnes tries to activate the high-voltage current, but a fire starts. Soon the entity gets close enough for the team to realize that it is a giant squid that begins to hit the habitat. The noise does not bother Harry, who continues to sleep in his room. Barnes notes that the pressure is decreasing, so he sends Ted to fix it. However, when Ted turns the valve, he receives an electric shock that throws him against the wall, leaving him unconscious. While Norman runs to turn the valve, the squid continues to attack, so Barnes orders Norman to activate the high-voltage current again. As soon as he pulls the lever, the squid disappears, but another fire starts in the room. The group runs to put out the fire, and Ted wakes up to help. The emergency doors are activated, so Barnes blocks them with a box so they don't get trapped. Unfortunately, when he tries to move the box, it slips, and the door crushes Barnes to death. At the same time, part of the ceiling falls on Ted, trapping him. He tells Norman to get out while the flames consume him and kill him before extinguishing themselves. Afterward, Norman tries to contact Jerry to ask who put out the flames, but in response, Jerry asks him if he liked the calamari and reveals that he can manifest more. Norman tries to explain that these manifestations are killing people, but the messages only ask him to stop calling him Jerry. Then Norman goes to see Harry, who is reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. When Norman mentions the attack, Harry says he slept through the entire incident. Then he comments that he loves the book, but can't get past page 87 because it's too terrifying. He tells him about all the deaths and the fact that most of the oxygen has run out, but Harry remains strangely calm. Later, Beth reminds Norman that they need to reset the mini submarine. Norman admits to her that he suspects Harry and believes he could be responsible for the incidents, so he decides to do the reset, while Beth watches Harry to keep him away from the mini submarine. Norman goes out and quickly does the reset, but on the way back, he notices bubbles coming out of his suit and calls Beth to help him. However, it is Harry who answers. Harry explains that he has a faulty valve, but that he will be fine. Norman keeps moving forward, and when he reaches the stairs, a snake suddenly attacks him. After much struggle, the creature simply leaves, allowing Norman to safely return to the habitat. Sometime later, the guys see Beth entering the ship and ask her why. Beth explains that she is looking for food since they have run out, but Harry says there is plenty of food in the kitchen. Norman gets angry and shouts at Beth for not watching as she had promised. He also mentions the food in the kitchen. Beth checks the fridge and cupboards, but is confused because she swore they were empty before. Norman continues to argue with her, and Beth loses her patience, accusing Norman of believing Harry instead of her. She also reminds him that Norman never told what he did inside the sphere. When Norman asks her if she also entered the sphere, Beth simply leaves the room. Later, Norman picks up Harry's book from the floor, but when he looks up, he sees that Harry is still reading the same book. Desperate, Norman opens the cupboards and finds more copies of the book, realizing that Beth was right. He runs to the computer and asks Jerry what is inside the sphere, but the answer again asks him to stop calling him Jerry. Desperate for answers, Norman checks the code and realizes that Ted changed some letters in the decoding. The entity's name is actually Harry. Meanwhile, Beth leaves the habitat and prepares some explosives. When she returns, Norman tells her that the entity is Harry. Harry is manifesting the strange creatures around them. Norman also asks Beth to read page 87 of the book, which talks about a monster with incredibly long tentacles. The rest of the book is blank, as Harry was afraid to continue reading because he hates squid, and after entering the sphere, Harry gained the power to manifest those thoughts. The couple agrees that they need to make Harry sleep deeply to stop the manifestations, so they look for sedatives in the ship's medical supplies. They invade Harry's room, and Norman jumps on him to immobilize him, while Beth injects him with the sedative, causing Harry to pass out. Later, a message arrives from the surface informing them that the weather has improved and that they will be able to return to the surface in 6 hours. Norman goes to a flooded bathroom to brush his teeth, and a snake in the water takes the opportunity to climb up his pants. Norman screams, and Beth runs to the bathroom and grabs the creature, recognizing it as the most venomous snake in the world that should not be underwater. Afterward, Beth asks Norman to meet her in the laboratory, but when he arrives, she locks him inside. She explains that he is the one manifesting the snakes, so she wants him to also receive a sedative injection. Norman doesn't believe Beth, so she continues giving examples. Harry is asleep, so the snake couldn't have come from him, and the jellyfish were Norman's fear, just as the squid was Harry's fear. As Norman refuses to cooperate, Beth decides to cut off the oxygen in the room, and the laboratory begins to flood. Stubbornly, Norman dives to grab an oxygen cylinder and manages to escape through a hatch. While Norman swims out of the habitat, Beth checks the computer and finds videos of Barnes questioning his mental health and Norman reprimanding him, which makes her anxious and makes her leave the room. When Norman returns, he hears Beth crying and tries to comfort her, concluding that both of them were inside the sphere, just like Harry. Speaking of Harry, he wakes up and demands an explanation. Norman explains that the sphere gave them the power to manifest their thoughts into reality, and the same probably happened to the original crew, who probably committed suicide due to paranoia. At that moment, the computer announces that the explosives outside the habitat have been activated, and they have 13 minutes to evacuate. Beth explains that those explosives were brought to blow up the coral, but she armed them as a defense against the creatures. At first, she thinks a new manifestation activated them, but then she realizes that her own thoughts activated the explosives, as she was thinking of taking her own life again. To make matters worse, Harry points out that the explosive will disintegrate everything because the ship has liquid hydrogen. The group immediately runs to the mini-submarine, but once inside, they cannot start it. Suddenly, they are transported inside the ship, so they begin to look for a way out, but only manage to walk in circles. Finally, they end up in front of the sphere, and Norman's reflection tells him to press the button. Realizing what is happening, Norman tells his friends to release their thoughts, and instantly the group reappears in the mini-submarine. Norman presses the button, and the mini-submarine finally begins to move towards the surface, escaping just in time to avoid the explosion that completely destroys the habitat. When the mini-submarine reaches the surface, the group goes through the decompression process and finds a private place to talk. They cannot tell the truth to the Navy because no one would believe them, and the sphere was probably destroyed by the explosion. Beth comments that they still have the power, but fears manifesting dangerous things, or that the power will fall into the wrong hands. When Norman says that the power is already in the wrong hands, Harry has an idea. They should use the power to make them forget everything they discovered. This would explain why the incident in the ship's records is marked as unknown. The trio takes hands and thinks about forgetting everything related to the mission and the power. At that moment, the sphere rises from the ocean and flies into the sky at high speed, returning to outer space. When the scientists open their eyes, they don't understand why they are holding hands.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.